So he asked the next guy, what are you doing? He says, officer, can't you see? I have a net. I'm pulling the fish out of the water. Then he asked the third guy, what are you doing? He says, can't you see, officer? Those two people are crazy. They think they're fishing. I'm rowing to get out of here. Okay. Today's broadcast is sponsored by, Akiva, could you please help me with that?
Yes, the Menzalewski family, Leilu Nishmas, Ruvain Breb Eliezer's yahrzeit is Chav Beis, and the Lewish family, Leilu Nishmas, Mrs. Lewish.
Mrs.
Chaya Sarah
Iluyish.
Basno, Mrs.
She was called,
Iluyish.
Rabbi Model called her Mrs. Iluyish.
Inside your side a joke. Mrs. Iluyish.
Her neshama should have an aliyah. Listen,
Yeah.
she's responsible for the chinuch of so many people. She was the voice of sanity in that school. Whenever you got thrown out, she would give you a note to go back into class. She was the doorkeeper. She was the gatekeeper. She always let us back into class.
Yeah.
She's the only one who didn't scream at us and frown at us to figure out what we did wrong today. She always told us about what we did right today. So she was a warm and welcoming person in Yisrael Torah. Okay.
Did you have Mr. Nussbaum as a principal, Yosy Zalman?
After what I said, you have a question? What was your question?
I had him. I had him as a principal.
So did I. We all did.
He gave me Petch.
Me too.
And
Me too.
He gave me big Petch, and Mrs. Lewis did whatever she could to save me from his Petch.
Right? You see, Mrs. Lewis was almost the voice of reason. She was like the mother in the office who calmed these hot-headed people down to create some plane of sanity.
I don't get it. I used to get Petch.
What?
I don't get it. I used to get Petch. Not in school.
I understand. What you did at home is none of my business.
Where do you think she got her training from?
I knew Shmuel would pipe up eventually. Okay, so
I have much more to say, but I'm not going to get myself going now. It's too early.
Okay, you guys can have
How
the
can I provoke you?
Survivors Club later.
Zog the Heilige Gemara. Pshita. Nischaven Lizrik Shmoina. A person who wanted to throw something 8 amas. This is very similar. I'm like the third position of left field because then they hoped no balls would come to me. And it was inevitable that the ball always came to me first. So after I tripped over myself and stumbled and finally picked up the ball, like I looked like a guy chasing his hat on the Shabbos afternoon when he's walking to shul and it blows off. So after I picked up the ball, I tried to throw it. And if it gets to second base, already I'm excited, or if it at least crosses the baseline, but not a chance in the world. So it's Neschav and Lizrok. I was trying to throw it to the catcher, but it barely made second base. V'zork Arba, and it didn't go as far as he intended. Akiva, how is that for a sports analogy? Okay. And it wasn't a real sport analogy. It was like my perception of a sports analogy. Hare Kosav Shemi Shimon. It's no different than if someone intended to write the full name Shimon and he only wrote the first 2 letters. At that point, he's already over because the first 2 letters, Shin Mem, spell Shem. So it's even though he intended to write Shimon, the moment he's written enough to create a proper word, it's considered the malacha. So it should be no different. If I intended to throw something 8, and I threw it 4, so I did the malacha. But Neschavin Lizrek Arba V'zark Shmoina. What if I only wanted to throw it to second base because there was a runner that was getting to second base and we wanted to tag him out? And then suddenly, then I always had koyach. Whenever I was supposed to throw it to second base, that's when I was able to throw it all the way to the catcher. Mao, what would Allah be? Me, I'm reading.
By the way, this is the way you looked when you were throwing that ball. Anybody wants to see?
I'm on the left, right? Yaki's on the right.
You're on the left. Yep.
Okay. Mao, me, I'm reading. Do you say ha'apikle? Do you say that I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish? I went for Amos. The place where this person wanted to send the projectile to, it didn't stop there. So therefore, it should not be a malacha. Zok to Gemara. V'lav hanyu d'amar leRavina leRavashi. Didn't we just learn earlier yesterday where Ravina told Ravashi, v'amar he said, v'omer kol makom shetirtza tenuach, and that was the case where someone threw something from a reshus hayachid into a reshus rabim. but it continued on 4 amos in the Rishus Rabbim. So we said the reason why you'd be chayiv no matter what, right? That's how we finished off the day yesterday, is he said that wherever it lands, I'm going to be happy. So that's where you say there's a chiyuv. But if I actually wanted to throw it 8 and I threw it 4, or if I wanted to throw it 4 and I threw it 8, where it didn't land where I wanted it to, it should not be chayiv. So A, we have a problem with the first case where you said because of Shem and Shimon, and B, your second case, I also have a problem with. I don't see the shaila. Regardless, if it doesn't land where I intended, I should not be chayiv. Udika Amrit, and your argument that it should be chayiv when it was Nischaven Lizrak Shmoina V'Zork Arba, where you said because of Shem and Shimon, that's not a raya. Midomi, there's no comparison. Hosam Kama the like Siv Shem Loimichtav Shimon. When you're writing the name Shimon, there's many steps along the way. You have to write each of the 5 letters one at a time. So when you write the mem, that is part of the journey towards the full name Shimon. So you actually wanted to write the Shin, you wanted to write the mem. But Hacha, Kamad Lazark Arba, Lo Mizdaka L'Tamni. I had no interest whatsoever in throwing it 8, or had no interest whatsoever in throwing it 4, depending on what the case is. And therefore, there's an argument to say that it should be potter and ganzen. So Rashi, Hacha, Kokamad Lazark Dalid, Shetanuach L'Soif Dalid, Lo Mizrak L'Tmani, Bitmiya. If I'm trying to throw it 4, would I throw it 8, or vice versa? If I'm trying to throw it 8, do I need it to stop at 4? Of course not. If I'm trying to throw it 8 and it stopped at 4, his machshava is not in the sky at all. It's not like it's a stop along the way to 8. It's not at all what he wanted. And you cannot compare it to writing shin mem out of the word shimon, and therefore it's a mistaber that it should be potter.
And yes, we say that even if 4 is a 4 your chayiv anyways, it's talaram, no? And even though we're still saying that, we still want to say that he's potter.
Yeah, because I didn't want to throw it 4. I wanted to throw it 8. Mm-hmm. So the problem is not because my malacha didn't physically constitute a ma'aseh iser. The problem is by Shabbos you need malachas machshavas asutayr, and we didn't have that.
Yosy, does it matter how much he misses by? Like how exact do you have to be? You're talking about missing by 4 amas. What if he misses by 1 amma?
I guess if it doesn't land where he wanted it to land, then
within how much? Like how good of a pitcher does he have to be?
It all depends on what his expectations are, right? If he knows l'chatchila that he can't get it exact, then his expectations probably are not that accurate. You know, sometimes people don't have a true perspective of their own abilities. So if you think you can hit a bullseye at a kilometer, then that's your crazy malachas machshavas. Most people, when they throw things, they know what they have in mind, and usually what they have in mind is something that they feel they're capable of.
Okay, so there's no.
But it's all totally in your machshava. That's how Shabbos works. Even if you have an unrealistic expectation, but if your expectation was not fulfilled, you're not chayiv, because that's the special chiddush of the chiyuvi Shabbos, that it has to be melechus machshavas.
Looks like that in golf too.
It's called a handicap.
I never understood this Gemara. You would think 4 is half as good as 8, so why shouldn't it be good? Until you have a par 3 with a water trap between you and the hole. So hitting it halfway doesn't help. Hitting it halfway is worse because you can't go and get the ball, right? So
it's like Rabbi Gifter's famous word: 2 mal 12 and nicht 24. 2 times 12 does not equal 24. The famous kasha. If Rabbi Kiva came home after 12 years, and before he walked into the house, he heard his wife being sort of made fun of by her friend, saying, "Look at your husband, he abandoned you for 12 years. And she says, "You know what? I'm so happy with my husband sitting and learning. I would have no problem if he abandoned me another 12 years to learn more." When Rabbi Kiva heard that, he turned around and went right back to yeshiva. So all the Mefarshim asked, the Baal Moshe asked, "I don't understand. He's right there. He can hear his wife's voice. He didn't have the decency just to knock on the door and say hello." Zok Rabbi Gifter, as 2 mal 12 and nicht 24, and he said it with his full power. 2 times 12 is not 24. Had he went in to see his wife, it would have been a hefsek. It would have been a water trap in between the first half and the second half. and the learning has to be without a hefsek, and it wouldn't have been the same Rabbi Akiva had he came in to say hi to his wife. Don't try that at home. Tanur Rabbanon.
Yosy, one Fabrengen, we're going to have to take that answer apart. I heard that answer from a gifter. Doesn't digest well.
Okay.
I know.
We're learning about Rabbi Akiva. We were learning here about Rabbi Akiva Shitas over here.
No, the real answer is
Rabbi
if he
Akiva says
knocked on,
Rabbi Akiva was the one who said chayiv. He's the
the
one.
real answer
Drash,
is if he knocked
not
on the
Drash.
door and said hello, he wouldn't have gone at all.
I know that's right.
By the way, Mendel
Not
Kaplan,
such a
speaking
simple
about
answer.
Fabrengens, Mendel Kaplan was interviewed on 640 News last night. Did anybody hear the interview? So someone who did listen to the interview told me that they asked him, are you going to, because his shul also opened up today. They asked him, are you going to enforce wearing masks in your shul? He said, absolutely not. Baruch Hashem, my shul is full of adults and they know how they have to distance themselves and how they have to be careful, and I will not be enforcing it.
Well, there's
No,
your
I'm not-
answer. There's exactly your answer. His shul is full of adults. There's your answer. You just answered it.
Tanur Rabban. Hazork Mishus Harabim, Lishus Harabim. If someone throws something from Rishus Harabim to Rishus Harabim, or Rishus Hayochid Be'emtza, and there was a Rishus Hayochid in between, and you threw a Dalet Amos, it traveled Dalet Amos in Rishus Harabim. Chayiv Dalochet Chayiv. So Rashi tells us the case exactly. In over Rishus Harabim Dalet Amos, if it traveled 4 Amos in Rishus Harabim, even though in the first Rishus Harabim it might have only traveled 2 Amos, and in the second Rishus Harabim it only traveled 2 Amos, you could be mitzaref for 2 Amos from Rishus Harabim A to Rishus Harabim B, and you don't say that the fact that it traveled through a Rishus Yochid in between would be a mafsik. What if it was less than 4 Amos? Then the loch is potter, it will be potter. Fact Gemara. And Rashi says right away, it still traveled from a Rishus Harabim over a Rishus Yochid. So Rashi, you're not chayiv outside saw to loyamrina kluto k'mishoncha. This sheet is not going according to Rabbi Akiva, who's machmer and says kluto k'mishoncha. Therefore, you're going to be potter. There's no chiyuv for the fact that it went over the airspace of the Rishus Hayochid. But nevertheless, the 2 Amos from the first Rishus Harabim and the 2 Amos from the second Rishus Harabim will be mitzaref. My kamash malon. What's the chiddush? So tomorrow, ha kamash malon, that Rishus mitzarefus. That in and of itself is a chiddush. That you could take 2 Amos from one Rishus Harabim and be mitzaref with the 2 Amos from the other Rishus Harabim, and it's combined to create an isser. And the second chiddush is the loy amrinon kluta kamosh huncha. The second chiddush is that there's no chiyuv fear out the Rishus Hayochid be'emtza, which indicates that we do not hold like Rabbi Akiva that kluta k'mish huncha. Okay, now we're going to be getting into a little bit of a complicated sugya, but it leads in, it segues in to understanding how they built a Mishkan, which is, although technical, but interesting. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, Amar Baba, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. There's a lot of people on this committee. Hamavir Dalet Amos B'Shus Harabim Mekayra or Makura. What if you made something travel 4 Amos in B'Shus Harabim, but it was covered? And a typical example would be a bridge. If you were Maver Dalet Amos on Bathurst Street underneath the 401, if assuming Bathurst would be a B'Shus Harabim, but you're under a bridge, potter, that will be potter. So if you're under a cover, even though it's in Rishus Harabim, there's no problem of being Maver Dalet Amos. Why is that? Because in the Midbar, it was open air and there was nothing covered. So since there's no example of carrying at the time of the Midbar where you have a covering, therefore there's no Havoris Dalet Amos when you cover. So the Avnei Nezer asks a very simple question. First of all, we were completely encased in an Anaya covered, and we also had an Anan on top of us. Yet the Machne Levi at least was considered a Rishus Harabim. How could that be? We were covered on all sides. We were covered on top. So Avnei Nezer says, being that Anonim can be blown by the wind, even though I don't think those Anonim were able to be blown by the wind. As a matter of fact, they protected us from wind. They always maintained a comfortable environment. But being that Anonim are easily blown away, they were not considered mechitzas. Is that so? The wagons that we were discussing yesterday, on which they carry the krushim, well, they have covers. You know why they're covered? Because when you have the krushim sitting on them, that creates a very big platform. That means everything underneath the platform would be a Rishus Harabim, but a Rishus Harabim that's covered. And the Amarav Mishum Rabchia, Agolos, the wagons, Tachteim underneath them, Uveineim and in between them, Vitzideim and their sides, Rishus Harabim, are considered Rishus Harabim. So if you say that in a covered area, it's not considered Rishus Harabim, how could Rav have said that underneath the Agolos is Rishus Harabim? Zokt Gemara, Kika Amarav, Bidar Arta. Zokt Rashi, what does it mean, Bidar Arta? I don't even know how to pronounce this word. I didn't look at the art scroll. What does the art scroll say? How to pronounce this word? Bidar Osa, Bidar Arta?
Bidar Osa.
Oh, it's right on the next page. Kika Amarav. Bidra Osa. Bidra Osa. Okay. So Rashi says, Bidra Osa, it's berevach shebein shuroi saseder. Now, if you can imagine, they had the krushim lined up on top of the agolish. Show you a cedar kerish al kerish. They piled up beam upon beam, seder echad, one row, umanichei revach, and they left space. The cedar seder acher umanichei revach. So if we get a visual of it, let me get a visual of it. I'm going to stop sharing my Gemara, and I'm going to share you another visual. So just give me one moment. So I'm just going to look at this a little bit more closely. So this is what it means. This is what the wagon looked like. They piled up krushim on them, but as you can see, there's space in between the krushim. They weren't butt up against each other. So, but the riyasa that the Gemara is talking about is if you were carrying 4 amas and you were part of that area was underneath these krushim were 10 amas. If you carried 4 amas underneath this gap, under one of these 2 gaps, that's where there would be a chiyuv.
How much were these krushim were supposed to have weighed?
Well, think about it. It's solid wood, solid cedar wood. That's approximately 3 feet by 4 feet by 30 feet. That's very, very heavy.
Logs.
I don't know. 3 feet by 4 feet, Avigdor, is a very big log. And if it's 18 to 20 feet long, I mean, that wagon can weigh, I don't know, 6-7 tons.
And they didn't even have emergency brakes that the Ministry of Transportation would test from time to time.
Yosy, there's one other factor. These agolos were covered. They're covered wagons.
We're going to get into that. Exactly what the construction of the wagons were. Right now, they might have been. We're not discussing covered above. The question is if there's even a pan below. From the picture, you could see a hint of what's coming. Is there was no pan below at all, like we discussed yesterday. They were similar to the trailers that carry steel. They're just a frame. But the Gemara is going to get into that. But the main point now is with the way the krushim were lined up on the agolos, there was a gap between them, and that's what the Gemara means b'driyasa. So let me go back.
You said yesterday that they loaded them lengthwise, though.
You're right. You're right. The way they had it yesterday was they loaded them lengthwise. They must have turned them 90 degrees when they put them on. So they put them on like this area here. The back 2 wheels would have been backed up against the wall of the Mishkan, but they must have pivoted them when they put them down.
Yosy, what are we trying to establish here? That
it wasn't necessarily covered. That underneath there were areas underneath the agolos that were not necessarily covered.
Wouldn't those be a makom patur? Wouldn't it be a makom patur on top or a carmelis?
We're
Because
talking
it's-
below. We're talking on the ground
Yeah.
below
What's the space underneath
the
the
wagons.
Carmelis?
I'm sorry?
What's the space underneath the Carmelis?
Rosh Hashanah.
Space underneath the Carmelis.
Why not? If it's unimpeded, why not?
And the Agolas themselves, what rishus are they?
Rosh Hashanah. Right, that's the whole limit, going from one Rosh Hashanah to the other Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. So the Gemara
Right,
says over
so-
here.
Why are we trying to establish what's something that's covered or not? What is that?
Well, Rav said anything that's covered it's not called Rosh Hashanah. The problem is Rav also said that the area underneath the Agolos was Rosh Hashanah. So how could you make these two things fit? If anything covered is not Rosh Hashanah, and under the Agolos is Rosh Hashanah, and under the Agolos was clearly covered, how does that work? So that's what we have to say, that there were areas under the Agolos that were not covered. Those gaps in between the crushing.
Mhm.
Now the Gemara.
I don't have
not
a
satisfied
good vision. I'm sorry. I said, what does that mean? A covered wagon? Are we talking about Little House on the Prairie covered wagon?
Yeah, but that's not what it was. But I think that's what David's referring to. Could be
Yeah.
some of the Kalim were carried in covered wagons. The Crushim were not covered wagons, but the wagons that they depict for
It's
the
like a frame
Kalim
trailer.
look like
yes,
a
a frame
Little House on the
trailer.
Prairie.
You know, it's like a frame trailer where you don't have a bed to the trailer. It's just the frame itself.
That's right.
And
That's
like
what the
the
Gemara
one
is
they
going to
carry the
explain.
logs, let's say, for
Right.
instance.
The Gemara is going to say that shortly regarding the trailer that held the Crushim, but the trailers that held the Kalim were covered like Little House on the Prairie.
Just by the way, Nachamal, I keep holding on to this. The physics in that picture make no sense.
Why, you think the wheels would crush?
Yeah, look, forget the wheels. The frame of that wagon was not any bigger, was not any thicker than the logs that it was carrying, than the crusher that it was carrying.
It was made out of a
Yeah, the
different
crushing-
material.
The Crushim would crush the wagon.
Right? The crusher would crush the wagon. They didn't have steel in those days.
So you're
They did.
asking Akasha on a cartoon picture. Maybe they were built more rigid.
By the way, they did have steel in those.
No, they had iron. They didn't have steel.
The Iron Age, as a matter of fact.
What I mean
the
to say is that the Yidden did not bring iron out of Mitzrayim to carry crushim, and they didn't have welders.
I'm presuming these may be the same Agolos that came to pick up Yaakov,
Yaakov.
bring him to Mitzrayim.
Right? But
That's
Yaakov
Chi
didn't
Ruach
weigh
Yaakov
the-
Aviyim. Those are Golos.
yeah, but Yaakov Avinu didn't weigh the weight of one keresh or koresh.
Yeah,
The
but he had
crush- the
four
crush-
wives. Do you have any idea how many clothing 4 wives bring along?
Yeah,
The,
but he
the
had many
crushing
wagons.
themselves were the frame. The crushing themselves supported each set of wheels.
What I would
That's
say-
you ever see a
How could the
logging
Crushim
trailer?
support the wheels?
We-
The
we-
weight
we
Look
did
at
the
look at
math.
look at a
One
logging
cubic
trailer. That's
foot-
how it works.
1
A
cubic foot
logging
of cedar
trailer
is
is not made
23
out of
pounds.
logs.
Yes, it
A
is.
logging
It's made,
trailer, a logging
Yeah.
trailer is not made out of logs. It's made out of
Yeah.
steel.
and there are trailers that are made out of the product that's being carried, like the houses that they brought to Victoria Victoria Lake or Victoria, right? They would just put a wheel in the back, a wheel in the front, and the house pillow was the trailer. So this is the same thing.
Okay, let's see the Gemara weiter. Hier komen we op het Rosa. Michti fragt die Gemara. Orcha da Agola kam havoi. How long was the length of the Agola? Chamish amen. It was 5 amas. Pushi the keresh, the width of the keresh, kam havoi, amso palga. It was, because we know the dimension of the keresh was an amma and a half by an amma by 10 amas. So normally, if you lie down something in a wagon, you're going to lie it on its wider side. So you'll put it down on its side that's an amma and a half wide. So pushing the keresh kam havoi, amso palga. It was an amma and a half. So we got 3 rows. Kama Moshev, how many rows of crushim would fit on the trailer that's 5 amas long? Plus. So what's 1.5 times 3? 4.5. That means there's a half an amma of extra space. So they spaced the 3 sets of crushim evenly so that there was a quarter of an amma in between each row. Pashalei pagadam. So you have a half amma left over between 4.5 amas and 5. So kishadile mar. Okay, stop. So that's how it was set up. So let me go back to the picture. I have to go back and forth to the picture, which is a little pain in the neck, but at least we have a picture to look at. So if you're going back to the picture shows very nice and clear how from end to end is 5 amas. which means if you have an amah and a half here and an amah and a half here, it's 3. That means from here to here, there are 2 amahs in between the 2 outer sets of krushim. The middle set was only an amah and a half wide. So if they placed it center, there would be a quarter of an amah gap in between each of the 2 sets of krushim, and that's where it would be. Underneath there would be a full-blown Rishus Harabim. Frek the Gemara, that does not work. So let's go back to the Gemara. That does not work, Dr. Gemara. Why is that? Because what is the distance in between the 3 sets of krushim? A quarter of an amah. An amah is 6 tvachim. A quarter of an amah is 1.5 tvachim. We just learned that up to a 3 tefach gap, you say loved. You make believe halacha l'Moshe Messinai that it's not make believe. Halacha l'Moshe Messinai is that it's considered one piece. So frek the Gemara kishad lemar beini ubeini kilovadami. We shouldn't consider those gaps of a quarter of an amah that they're a gap. We look at it like it's all filled in. So we're back to the same problem. How could you say that underneath the agolos would be considered a Rishus Harabim if you also said that a covered Rishus Harabim is not Rishus Harabim? And clearly underneath the agolos, you're covered with the krushim. Zok the Gemara, mi savris krushim apusayu have a manach lahu. Who said when they placed the krushim, they placed it down so that its amah and a half side was lying horizontally? Achudon manach lahu. Maybe they were placed on their amah width side. So now if you think about it, you have a 5 amah trailer and you have 3 sets of krushim that are all 1 amah wide. So there's a full amah in between each of the sets. A full amah is more than 3 tvachim. Zok Gemara, that doesn't make sense because soif sumcha de kerish kamahava. How wide would it be? Amsa kamahava. So what would you do? Have a moisav arba. What they would do is, since there was only 1 amah difference, they wouldn't only put 3 sets; they would put 4 sets. So let's get the words right. So I don't read it like a Becker. Sumcha de kerish kamahava amsa. So the width of each kerish, since they're standing up, is only an amah wide. So kamahava moisav. How many would they line up if you have 4? If you have 1 amah of space that each kerish takes up, and you have 5 full amahs, how many rows would you put? You would put 4. So you might all jump at me and say, I don't understand. If my wagon is 5 amahs, why wouldn't I put 5? So the Rashi tells us they wouldn't put 5. So kama moisef kama sedorim yochel hoishav al oich toif tesel klosa vesuloi umachzikos dalar amis v'chatzi pashta revach. That was the earlier case. So the later case is kama moisef kama sedorim usader arba dal koichach kol ma sheyochel asader al pidnei oich hagala humasader. We want to fill the surface of the wagon as much as possible. So I'll put 4. Ve'eina magbia loishav zu al zu. You don't want to pile them up too high. Sharei yud beis krushim hoyu la'agol achas. There were 12 krushim on each of the agolas because shemem ches krushim hoyu. There was a total of 48 krushim. 48 divided by 4 wagons would have meant that there would have to be 12 krushim on each of the 4 wagons. Now, how do you know that there were 48 krushim in total? Because there were chav krushim l'tzafon. So the north wall was 20, the south wall was 20, so now we're at 40. The sheish l'mayrev, and then the eastern wall, the western wall was 6 krushim, so we're at 26. And then you needed the 2 corner posts, the shnayim l'mukutzois. So the chivin derachvan amah v'chetzi, since they're an amah and a half wide, u'moshev chudon kotzar, and they're sort of narrow. If you pile them up too many krushim, one on top of the other, they would topple over. He would only line up 4 krushim, even though the wagon was 5 amos long, and technically they could have held 5 kroshim, they only lined up 4 kroshim. To fit so tight, perfectly, exactly 5 amos worth of kroshim on the 5 amos worth of trailer, it wouldn't sit right. They wouldn't be able to push them so close together. We know on the wider end, on the arm and a half end of these kroshim, there were rings that they put a briach, they put a pole through to hold the wall together. So those rings stuck out. So when they were lying them on their side on the amah surface, those rings would get in the way. So there had to be some space in between them. So let's have a look again at the picture just to get clarity, and then we should be able to cruise through it.
Yosy, this was for the Kaddish and the Kaddish Kadoshim. That number applies to?
Yeah, the entire structure of the Mishkan, including both the Kaddish and the Kaddish Kadoshim,
and what about the outside? What about the whole outside?
The amudim that held up the chutzner.
Yes.
I don't know. The Gemara doesn't discuss how those moved, but those probably also needed. Those are even taller. They probably also needed some type of wagons. I'm not sure how those moved. That's a very good point. So here you see, the Gemara is discussing. No longer are we setting up the kroshim with their amah and a half side down, which would only allow room in 5 amos for 3 sets of kroshim. Rather, they set them up with 4 rows, and each row only took up 1 amah because they stood up the keresh on the side that is only 1 amah. Therefore, they were easily able to fit 4 rows in 5 amos, and there was a distinct gap in between them. Now, if you do the math, let's think about it. 4 of the 5 amos are going to be taken up. You have 1 amah left, and that 1 amah left, you can split between the 3 gaps in between 4 rows of kroshim. There'll be 3 gaps. So if you take 1 amah and you divide it by 3, assuming that an amah is 6 tfachim, 1 amah divided by 3 would be 2 tfachim, which means there would be a gap of 2 tfachim in between each of these rows of kroshim. So Sok Gemara, if you only have 2 tfachim, you can say love it again. If you could say love it again, we consider that the gap in between the rows of kroshim would be sealed. And again, how could you say that it's considered to be a Reshus HaRabim underneath the kroshim? So let's have a look. Kishad limar beini beini kolovodami. Misav is kroshim apasayav manachlu maybe achudah manachlu zok soif sumcha the keresh kam hava amsa. The bottom surface of the keresh when it was sitting up like this would be an amah. Kam hava moisav arba. You would make 4 rows of kroshim piled up on the agala. Pashala amsa, which means there's 1 amah free out of the 5 amos of the trailer. So kishadi lamar beini ubeini. So what's going to be in between each of these 3 rows, each of these 4 rows of kroshim? There'll be 3 gaps of 2 tfachim each. Not 3 tfachim, but 2 tfachim. So then kalovit. So we're right back where we started from. So kroshim milamatan uvyon amo milamalan kolin v'hochen at geetzba shapir. There was a shita who held that the kroshim weren't blocks. They actually got thinner. They actually came to a point at the top. So they might have been an amah thick at the bottom, but at the top they were not an amah thick. So therefore, when they lined them up on the agala, there was actually a lot more space in between them because they weren't taking up the full amah. And the art scroll gives you a picture of how that would have looked. See, if each of these kroshim were pointy at the end, so there would be one side that would be flat, which would face the inside of the Mishkan, but the outside it was a sloped wall. So if that's the way it looked, so then in fact you would have greater gaps in between the 3 rows. That's what the Gemara is suggesting. So if you held that each of the kroshim came to a point, so then you'll still have more than 3 tfachim in between here, and this is the area under which we can consider a Reshus HaRabim. However, if you don't hold like that, if you hold if you learn like we've always envisioned, that it's a board that has the same dimensions on top as it has on the bottom, how are you going to find a way that under the Agola should be considered a Rosh Hashanah and not a Rosh Hashanah? Zok to Gemara, Omer of Kahana, Ba'api. So what does that mean? Ba'api Heicha Manachlu, Agabe the Agola. Okay, so Api means rather than set it up like we thought until now, I believe he has rather than we said until, which is our setting it up in 4 rows with 3 evenly spaced gaps of 2 tefachim in between. There's another way you can set them up. Now we know on one surface of each of the krushim there were the loops. So what you could do is you could take 2 krushim and you could set them back to back. If you set them back to back, the loops would be sticking out on either side. So if you set it back to back, then you would have 2 tefachim at the back of the wagon. I'm sorry, you would have 2 amas at the back of the wagon. You would have 2 amas tied together at the front of the wagon, and there would be a gap of an amah, which is 6 tefachim. This gap is the perfect corridor that would be considered a Rosh Hashanah underneath, because you have a full amah width that's not covered where you wouldn't say loved. So that's what the Gemara wants to suggest. The Gemara wants to suggest that the way they loaded the wagons was ba'atbi, and therefore, since it was set up where 2 krushim were close together, and then the other 2 krushim were close together, and you have a full amah in between, that's where you have an opening of an amah, and therefore underneath there would be a Rosh Hashanah. Zok the Gemara, Heicha Manach Lahu. This goes back to David Lightman's ha'ara. How did you put it down on the wagon? Agabe the Agola. You put it on the surface of the wagon. Well, Agola Gufa Mekoyer have it. What, doesn't a wagon have a basin? Doesn't a wagon have a floor? So that floor, even though the krushim were spaced, but the floor of the wagon should act as a ceiling to the area underneath the wagon. And weiter, why is it considered a Rosh Hashanah Lagabe being Mavrid al Ramis Rosh Hashanah? Amar Shmuel, Zok Shmuel, be a Seidois, which is also what David Lightman said. That means the trailer that's carrying big beams, like a lumber trailer, doesn't necessarily have a basin at all. It just has a couple of beams across that are used to support the big objects. And again, the art scroll has a little depiction of it. So this is what it could have looked like. So didn't really have a floor. Chaim Tzvi, this is probably not to scale, because as you said, something as flimsy as this would hardly be able to support the weight of the krushim. It was probably built in a much more robust fashion.
At least the wheels look a little bit bigger.
Well, didn't they say that the objects in the Mishkan and etc. didn't really carry themselves? I don't know if that extends to the krushim.
The Aron was nice of. The Aron was nice of, but I'm not sure if all the maybe David Zoltan
Just on the back of the olive map puts one of the wagons at 50 tons.
Who says it's 50 tons?
I did the math. If it's 1.5 amas by 4.5 amas by 4 amas by 10 amas, and an amah is 2 feet approximately, right? So, and then the average weight of cedar wood, the density is 23 pounds per cubic foot. It comes to 99,360 pounds, which would be 50 imperial tons.
So Chaim Tzvi, at how many tons do you have to have head brakes?
I'll tell you something.
Beautiful.
With this calculation, with this calculation, which I already made, I beat Avigdor to it. I just didn't want to say anything about it because I was busy with this before. I would ask David Zolti about those Levium, how big those Levium had to be in order to pull them.
I'm thinking if the Levium weighed what I weigh, how strong the Aron must have been to carry them.
Where's Mechi? Mechi's also a Levi.
I think they used a crane, actually. They must have had some kind of a winching device that would help things along, or use a lever. They weren't these the same people that built the pyramids?
Listen, Jews learned how to leverage. They do it in real estate and investments. Right. They did it. They started off with krushim. Leverage was an old method.
The Levium didn't work.
Well, there's also a question. You had 2 oxen pulling each trailer. So how much can an ox pull?
How many horsepower is an ox?
An ox can pull 13,000 pounds, apparently. I mean,
It was
I don't
Paul
know,
Bunyan's ox. No, it wasn't Paul
Is
Bunyan's
it on
ox.
pavement? There's also the coefficient of friction. The
They were,
road.
Now we see.
they were
Now we see.
Levium oxen.
Right. So there's somewhere the math gets lost.
But there was no friction because if they had a Anania covered all around them, could be that also eliminated friction.
Yeah, the Anania covered also leveled
So-
all the ground, so there
So
was no
you have to view these agolas more like Santa's sleigh.
Uh-huh.
There were 6 of them. Weren't there 6 oxen
4.
pulling a wagon?
There were
4?
4. Yeah.
4.
And not one of the oxen had a red glowing nose.
So either they could have used very low density cedar, but if it's the cedar of Lebanon, right, then that's very dense. So maybe they found some very low density cedar.
Okay, so let's see what happened over here. So Thunder Rabban, Kroshim. So Hamashul B'Seder. So now that we finished dealing with the Agolas, we got into the parsha of talking about the construction of the Mishkan. So we're now going to discuss how the walls of the Mishkan were built and how the ureas on top of them were set up. So Thunder Rabban, Milamatan Oivyon Amah. Everybody agrees at the bottom, the thickness of each keresh was an Amah. Or Milamalon, but as they move towards the top, Kolin v'hoilchin ad ke'etzba. The walls became thinner and thinner. Now it's important to note that this wasn't thinner on center, a perfect triangle. One side was flat. The side that would have been the surface that was on the inside of the Mishkan was always flat, and it's the outer surface that was shaved to create a point on top. Shinamar, how do I know this? Because it says Yu Tamim al Roshai. When the pasuk is talking about the Kroshim, it says V'yu Soyamim Milamayla V'yachta V'yu Tamim al Roshai, and we learn like a Gzer Shava, and it says L'hal Noimer Tamu Nichrasu. They were completely destroyed, meaning they became nothing. So it means as it gradually decreased until it was a point. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Naeh Omer no Keshem Shalamatan Ovyoin Amah. Which is the way we always have envisioned it. Shenemar Yachtov. It says in the pasuk Yachtov. Means Yachtov, it was the same below as it was above. In fact, Gemara, Vaksiv Samim, it does say the other word as well that you should learn from Tamu Nichrasu. Mahu the Leisu Shleimin v'lo Leisu the Nisra. The word Tamim that it says in the pasuk referring to the Kroshim meant that the Kroshim had to be from one solid piece of cedar. You couldn't take multiple pieces and glue them together. You couldn't use something like plywood, which is layers that are put together. Rather, it had to be one solid piece. In fact, the more of Yachtov, it does say Yachtov. So how does Rabbi Yehuda explain Yachtov? Meaning it should be the same above as it is below. So Yachtov Hudaloi Lish Lechafinu Mehadoli. That's to make sure that when you line them up, they're lined up perfectly, and that's why we had those badim that went through the taboyas that were on the kroshim to make sure that they line up perfectly, and you don't have the wall wobbling, one keresh sticking a little this way, one keresh a little that way.
Were the taboyas on the outside? So yes,
there were taboyas on the outside surface when they were set up.
So it would be on the angled surface.
There were taboyas towards the top, and there was taboyas towards the bottom. So they had a pole going through the taboyas, sort of joining, keeping all of the kroshim in line, both on top and on the bottom. And then there was a fifth buriach hatichon that they actually had a hole bored through the center of each keresh that they had a buriach going through it. And there's even a shita that learns that it was one pole that went through all 3 walls, meaning it was a nace. It had to turn the corner, and they had to be able to pull it out. So when they slid it in, it was soft. And then once they had it in, it must have hardened up. Otherwise, there's no way they could have gotten that briach in and out.
So in the same way, we don't really ask questions on how the wagons carried 50.
I guess there was a lot of, there's certain things where the Gemara identifies were b'derech nes. The Gemara doesn't identify specifically that it was b'derech nes, but people who understand transportation and weights could figure that out. And there must have been some type of divine intervention here. Zok the hele Gemara. Bist du mal man bekim shalmaten ovion amo kach mila mila ovinama. Bist du mal kontrab Nehemiah, who holds that these were perfectly rectangular kroshim. Hani dichsev ulayakese a mishkan yoma tas a shisha kroshim. How did the back wall of the Mishkan look? Let's think about it. we know that the inside surface of the base of the Mishkan was 10 amos. It was 10 amos wide. So let's think about it. 6 krushim. Each of the krushim are an amah and a half wide. What's 6 times 1.5? 6 times 1.5 is 9, which means the 6 krushim that the pasuk tells us were lined up along the back wall were only 9 amas. So we're missing 1 amah of wall. So what did you do for that? They had 2 corner posts. Usnei krushim tasel miktzos. You should make 2 krushim for the edges. Now, if each keresh is an amah and a half, so let's visualize this. Each keresh is an amah and a half wide, but when they're butting up in the corner to the krushim that were on the north and south walls, the part of them was covering the 1 amah of the thickness of the wall. So if I have a keresh that's an amah and a half wide, that's butt up to a keresh that's only 1 amah wide, it's going to stick out by a half a amah. So that was a perfect solution. You had 2 rows of krushim that were the north and south wall that were each 1 amah thick, and then perpendicular to them you placed a keresh that was an amah and a half thick. So that covered the 1 amah surface of the north and south wall that it was mating to, but it also stuck out a half a amah. Come to chois, the keresh that was butt up to the north wall stuck out a half a amah. The keresh that was butt up to the south wall stuck out a half a amah, and that's the 10th amah that we needed to fill the back wall of the Mishkan. He depicts it a little bit in the art scroll, but it's not crystal clear. So the way it would look like this. You could see these individual krushim, which were the north and south wall, they were only an amah wide, an amah thick, right? Now, if I have a keresh here that's an amah and a half, so it covers the amah of the wall and it sticks a half amah into the inside of the Mishkan. So therefore, these 6 krushim were 9. We had a half a amah covered by this keresh, and we had a half amah covered by this keresh, and that's how the back wall was formed. So Zok Gemara, that works out really nice, according to Rav Naeh, that these were all square. So that'll work out very good. Also, push it to honey. If you learn that it went up to a point, high aisle, the high nofik, it wouldn't really work well, because this is what it would look like at the back. All the way at the back, what it would look like is like this picture here. Because if the 2 ones at the back, when they mated, since this northern wall that was inverted in because it was shaved off, now you have the top of the back wall sticking out. So the shape sticks out. How would you deal with that? Frek the Gemara. So the Gemara answers very simply. You just shave down those 2 corner krushim, you shave them down. So the Gemara, the shafi lahu kiturin, you shave them down like a mountain, make them pointy. And he depicts that right over here, where you can see this little piece he shaved off. So the piece that stuck out over here, you shave off, and now it will be part of the same plane of the back wall, but its side will be shaved off as well to match the plane of the north wall, and the same thing on the other side to match the plane of the left wall. So I want to just quickly bring the picture up so it becomes a little bit clearer. So I'm going to stop the share of the Gemara, and then I'm going to bring that document up again.
What was the purpose of that tapered to taper it? Just aesthetically, just aesthetics?
It would have been exeris akasa, right? They learned it from Sukkim. So the question is why the Rebbeinu Shalom would have done it that way, it's hard for us to know.
Okay,
so this is what it would look like. The Nehemiah learned they were all square. Rabbi Yehuda learns that they came to a point, like we discussed. And the problem was this corner keresh, how do you deal with it? So the Gemara says you ended up shaving it down. And that takes us to the end of the sugi of the krushim. Now we're going to see how this impacts the uriyos. And right off the bat, you can figure out how it impacts the uriyos. The question is, as the uriyos, which were the roof of the Mishkan, as they covered the roof of it, did they only have 10 amos, which was the inner opening of the Mishkan to traverse, or before they folded down, did they also have to go over the 1 amah thick keresh. So the difference between if the crushim came to a point at the top, or if the crushim were flat on top, would have an impact with how long the curtains would hang down along the sides. Because if there's a point at the top of each of the crushim, then the top roof is only 10 amos wide. But if you also have the width of the crushim on either wall, then the horizontal portion of the urias would be 12 amos, leaving less amos to hang down the side. And that's what the Gemara is going to deal with now. The Gemara, for brich hatichain b'soich hakrushim, the brich hatichain was inside the crushim. Zok the Gemara, Tana b'nes hayoimid. It was with a nes, because how else could it get all the way around? It must have been al yedei nes. V'asa mishkan tasa esi urios. The first level of urios were cheletz v'argaman v'shela ashani v'sheish. It was woven from multiple fabrics, and there were 10 urios. Each one, each urea was 28 long, and it was 4 amos wide. So I had 10 of those. So if I have 10 ureas that are each 4 amos wide, I have a total of 40 long by 28 wide, once everything's put together. So let's figure out how they place these ureas on top of the Mishkan. Shadi urchayu lepusyu the Mishkan. Kam hava esrin v'tamli. So you had the length of each urea was 28 long. So when you place that 28 over the top of the Mishkan, we were dealing with a total of 28. So dal eser le'igra. Right away, there's 10 amos that covers the inner surface, the inner opening, the airspace of the Mishkan. Pashalahu tes. Pashalahu tes lahagisa, tes lahagisa. Because if you start off at 28 and you lose 10, which is the top roof of the Mishkan, you're left with 18. And that had to be split evenly between the north side and the south side. So there'd be 9 to hang over on the north side, and there'd be 9 amos to hang down on the left side, on the south side. So you would have Tesla Hagisa, Tesla Hagisa. Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that the crushim came to a point, so the moment it was 10 amos wide, the ureas were able to turn down and run diagonally down the sloped wall. So what would happen is, I would have 9 amos down. How tall were the crushim? 10 amos. So in fact, there would be 1 amah at the bottom uncovered, which was the amah that the adonim were, because the adonim, which were the sockets that the crushim set into, were 1 amah high. So Rabbi Yehuda migla amah da adonim. The only thing that would be not covered by those ureas would be the bottom layer of the adonim. Rav Naeh, but according to Rav Naeh, migla amah da crushim. It would only hang down, not 9 amos, but only 8 amos, because we lost an amah on top to go over the top surface of the keresh. So that means the amah of the adonim would be exposed, and an additional amah of the crushim, the bottom amah of the crushim, would also be exposed. That's how it was from north to south. Okay. Now let's look at how it worked out from east to west. Kamahavia arbid. We know that the length of the ureas were 40, because you had 10 ureas that were each 4 amos wide. So if you put them all together, you have 40. Now, dal klasen leigra. We know the inner cavity of the Mishkan was 30 amos. So out of that 40, right away, 30 is the roof over the Mishkan. Pash yud, you have 10 left. So the Rabbi Yehuda, mechasya amadadonim, if you had 10 left to go over the back, so 10, it would go all the way down to the floor, which means if you stood at the back of the Mishkan, you wouldn't even see the adonim. You would see nothing, because you have 10 full amos coming down to the bottom, because Rabbi Yehuda held that there was no surface of the top of the crushim, because it came to a point. But the Rav Naeh, according to Rav Naeh, that it came to a point. So now what would happen is Rabbi Naeh Megalia Amad Adonim. According to Rav Naeh, where there was an extra amah that had to go on top. So instead of having 10 amos to go down the side, I only had 9 amos to go down the side, which means that the urea at the back of the Mishkan came down 9 amos, which means there was 1 amah uncovered, which was the adonim. Now comes the next set of ureas. Those were longer. Those were 30 amas rather than 28 amas. So how did you do it? Shadi urchayu lepushur the mishkan. Out of the 30 amas, you lose 10. You have 10. Kam have it. Tolson. I'm sorry. I apologize. The urea was 30 amas, but we instead of having 10 sections, you actually had 11 sections. So 11 times 4 is 44. So the full length, when it was all assembled, was actually 44 amas long, rather than the 40 amas long. You had an extra section of ureas. So Shadur Rechayu Lepusha the Mishkan. How deep was the Mishkan? Kama Havitalson. It was 30 amas long. So now we have 14 amas of fabric still to play with. Zil Eser Le Igra. Dal Eser Le Igra. I apologize. I was getting mixed up. We're not talking about the length of the Mishkan. We're talking about the width of the Mishkan. So what we had 30 amas of width of this ureas. Cover it over the top of the Mishkan. Kamahava Tolson. You started off with 30 amas of fabric. Dal Asher Igra. The roof from north to south was 10 amas, so now I only have 20 amas left of fabric. So now I have 10 amas that can hang down on the north side and 10 amas that can hang down on the south side. According to Rabbi Yehuda, since it hung down 10 amas on each side, it actually went all the way down to the floor. Rav Naeh, since it had to go over an extra amah of wall on either side, Megalia Amada Donim. We only had 9 amas to hang down the wall, and in fact, it stopped 1 amah from the floor, and therefore the lowest level, the amah of the Adonim, was exposed. Tanya Nami Hachi, we'll learn a brayso that says the same thing. Va'amah mizeh, ba'oidif, the extra amah is lechasois amah shel Adonim, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Yehuda holds that the amah of the Adonim were covered over by the Urias Izim, but the Nechemi Omer lechasois amah shel Kroshim. All it will do is cover over the Kroshim, but since you only have 9 amas to hang down the sides, the Urias did not cover the last amah, which is the amah of the Adonim. Shari pusayu la'orchei l'mishkan. Now let's look at the length of the Mishkan. Kam mehavyon mem va'arba. You had 44 because you had 11 panels that were each 44 amas wide. So 11 times 4 is 44. So how did we distribute the 44 amas? So right off the bat, Dal Talsin Le'igra, the ceiling of the Mishkan was 30 amas long. Poshalahu Abar Shrei. So you're left with 14 amas. Dal Tarti Lechafla, you lose 2 amas for the kafla, which is the Chsiv Chafalta Siyariya Shishis El Mol Panei oil, meaning it hung over the Uriah hung over the front of the Mishkan by 2 amas. So out of the 14 amas that you have extra, you lose 2 amas because it hung over the front of the Mishkan. So I'm left with 12 amas for the back. I have 12 amas left to hang over the back of the Mishkan. According to Rabbi Yehuda, let's think about it. If you have 12 amas and you're coming down the wall that's only 10 amas long, the last 2 amas are going to sit on the floor. And the 2 amas represents a half of a urea, because each one of these sections were 4 amas wide. The pasuk says half of 1 urea, meaning 2 amas, will be tisrach, will drag on the floor. According to Rabbi Yehuda, in fact, you had 2 extra amas which dragged on the floor. That's what the pasuk means. El Rav Naeh, you would only have 1 amah left to drag on the floor. So my tisrach, what does it mean? It's going to drag on the floor. So it doesn't mean it's going to drag on the floor too. It just means it's going to extend that extra 2 amas further than the first set of ureas. So the first set of ureas, according to Rav Naeh, ended 1 amah from the floor. This is going to cover the last amah, and it's going to fold on the floor 1 amah. So that's why it means half a urea from the ureas izim, from the second set, would actually extend 2 amas past where the first set of ureas. And I think we should stop here, but let's just quickly run to the picture again, because he does do a pretty good job of depicting it. So here you have, here you have the first set of urias. The first set of urias, there was 10 of them, so it was 40 long. 10 times 4 is 40, and it was 28 wide. And the Gemara shows that according to
What was the
Yehuda,
material on the first one? You remember?
Sorry?
What was the material of the first urea?
it was chelas for gomen. It was a
was a
woven
woven.
material with multiple threads. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, on the sides, you remember you had 28. So if you have 28 long, you have 10 across the top, and then you have 9 here and 9 there. So the 9 hung down perfectly to cover the crushim up until the adonim. In the back, remember it was 40 amas long, so the top was 30, and then it hung down 10 in the back, so it went all the way to the floor. According to Rav Naeh, this 28 didn't go all the way to the floor because the 10 amas on top, also you had to add an extra 2 amas to it because of the thickness of the crushim on top. So it's 12. 28 minus 12 is 16. So on either side, the ureas hung down 8 amas, and in fact there are 2 amas exposed at the bottom. And on the back, we said it was 40 long. So you have 30 plus 1 at the back is 31, and then it hangs down by 9 amas, and in fact 1 amma was exposed. That was the first set of ureas. The ureas even were a little bit longer. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, they were 30. What they were put together, the width was 30. How do you distribute that? You have 10 amas across the top. You have 10 amas on either side. So that's why you see it came right down to the floor. You also had 44 lengthwise from front to back. So out of the 44, 30 gets eaten from the roof of the Mishkan, 2 stuck out in front. So 44 minus 32 is 12. And the final 12 hung over the back, 10 to the floor, and 2 along the floor. But according to Rav Naeh, you had the same 2 in front, you had the same 30, but you had an extra one over here. So if you have 44 and you subtract 33 from it, 44 minus 33 is 11. So what happened is it would come down the bottom of 10 amas, and the 11th amma would also hang out on the floor at the back, which is how we just learned from the Tana to very Bishmal, and that's how the Mishkan looked based on the different approaches. And I think we should stop here because we're running late. It is already 7:25. I'm sorry for running so late. I just didn't want to stop in the middle.
This is taken into account. It doesn't sink at all in the middle, inside.
That's right. It didn't
all,
sag.
all that weight.
And it still didn't sag. That's pretty good. It's almost like the Camp Agudah dining room. There's a 100-foot span without any posts. So this was 10 amas. This was a 30-foot span. Yeah, that's a good point. What time are we learning Motzei Shabbos? What time are we learning Motzei Shabbos?
10:45.
Okay, 10:45 it is. Yeah, 10:45.
Unless people want to get up for Nate's again Sunday morning, right?
Maybe we could start at some point learning outside on Shabbos. We can have a group up to 10 now, right?
Right.
Yeah, but now then we're going to have to agree if we're walking north or walking south.
Well, you go to the guy who gives the shear.
Yeah.
He's going to put out the refreshments.
Exactly. Yosy, can you host a shear?
Yes, I could. We have a besmedrash by me.
Oh, is that new?
I came out of the closet. The Rav let me come out of the closet. Like, now I know why there's a Pride Day. Because after being in the closet so long, it's so refreshing to come out of the closet.
We daven mincha after, like we can have a shear and then daven mincha, and then go home.
We could do that too.
Do you want to learn on Shabbos this week instead of Motzei Shabbos?
I already
Let's give it a try.
Let's
give it a try.
You can
on my reservation.
Give it a try.
You can link it on Doodle if you want.
I was able to book myself onto 2 minyanim at the same time. It didn't stop me.
It won't stop you.
I know.
Go for it, Dave.
You're also able to change someone else's schedule.
So what do you think?
Look,
You can kick somebody out?
We could vote somebody off the island.
Guys, can you post where we're going to learn? Because I have to run.
Yeah, we'll send you,
Okay.
Yeah, post it on the thing. So yes, you want to try a Shabbos afternoon thing to learn on Shabbos?
Works for
with
me.
mincha.
The only problem is, what if we get rain?
So the forecast right now, Shabbos forecast is.
Obviously, we don't do it if it rains.
No rain.
The forecast is
Even
clear.
though we have space,
All right.
but we're not going to be able to have social distancing, because if you could only put 2 people on the table, we're not going to have room for everybody to sit on a table. We could have chairs.
Yeah, we can sit on chairs and hold the Gemara. Or you can use maybe a, like a screen or something. You probably get a heter for that.
Have a good day, everyone.
Okay, Shlomi.
Yay.
I'm not used to giving share while I'm wearing pants.
Yosy, it is Pride Month. Perfect time.
It's about time you assert yourself in your
I
house.
was speaking to somebody. I'm sure somebody here will recognize who it was that I was speaking to, but I was speaking to somebody, and I was talking about how I'm no longer feel ashamed from having a backyard minion. I have pride. So he told me that he was once with his wife in Italy for Shabbos, and they went for a walk. And on the way back, they hear music and they hear singing and dancing. They said, "Oh wow, there's a parade going on." And as they get closer to the parade, they realize that it was the gay pride parade, and the problem is that it was in between them and their hotel, so they had to stand there waiting at the gay pride parade for about a half hour till they were able to cross and get through to their hotel. They just hope that there's no pictures of them on the internet of them participating in the gay pride parade.
Yes, I'm going to get you a mask like this.
I think it would be a good idea. I think it would be a good idea to shut off the recording now.
I was gonna